A young mother vanishes without a trace. Her husband, seemingly desperate for answers, reaches out to the media. But things aren't always as they seem. That same husband, pleading for his wife to return home, has now been arrested and charged in connection to her murder. But it gets more complicated than that. He's not charged with murder because there's no body. He is charged, though, with concealing a body. So how does all of this make sense? To start to understand, we have to head back to July 27th. That's the last day anyone for sure saw 28-year-old Mamta Bhatt. She's a registered nurse who works at the University of Virginia Health, Prince William Medical Center. That's in Manassas, Virginia, about 30 minutes outside of DC. That was the last day anyone definitely saw Mamta, but friends report speaking with her the next day on July 28th. That was also the last time she was active on social media, posting this video of her baby crawling up the stairs. The next week, Mamta was due back at work, but she didn't show. So on August 1st, coworkers reported this and called in for a wellness check. On August 2nd, police visited Mamta's home, and that's when her husband spoke with law enforcement for the first time. Her husband is this guy, Naresh Bhatt, who first told investigators that she was visiting relatives in New York or Texas. But as it turned out, Mamta doesn't have any relatives in either state. It then took until August 5th for Naresh to report his wife missing, and at that point, he told investigators he last saw her on July 31st, days after anyone else reported seeing her. Over the next few days, investigators continued the search for Mamta and upped the severity of her disappearance from missing to involuntary or critical missing person. They also confirmed Mamta hadn't spoken to any friends, family, or co-workers, either in person or even on social media since her disappearance. On August 14th, Naresh spoke with local media, claiming his wife had gone missing 3 times before this. He added that he missed her and was waiting for her safe return home. The next day, Manassas Park police called on the public for help, asking anyone with more information to report it. On August 21st, the couple's home was searched by police. At the time, law enforcement said they'd conducted hundreds of interviews and executed 10 search warrants. Then on August 22nd, Naresh was led away from the home in handcuffs. He was arraigned the next day on charges of prohibition against concealment of a body. At the time, a judge ordered he be held without bond. So you may be thinking, what led to his arrest? Well, I left some key points out of the timeline that investigators revealed after he was taken into custody. Now, according to court documents, Naresh was seen at Walmart on July 30th. At that time, he bought a pack of 3 knives. And when the search warrant was later executed, investigators only found 1. So where did the other 2 knives go? Investigators allege Naresh used them to murder his wife the same day on July 30th in their home. The next day, on July 31st, Naresh was back at Walmart, and this time he bought cleaning supplies. Unlike 2/3 of those knives, these were recovered when police executed the search warrants. So now that you've got the backstory of the case, let's bring in retired NYPD Sergeant Dan Murphy. Okay, Dan, so this case, I've actually heard about it for a while because this mother has been missing since July, late July, a couple of weeks now. So it's kind of been circulating. But just recently is when her husband was finally charged in connection to her murder. So why would it have taken so long for these charges to come?
That's a good question. He apparently didn't report his wife missing until after a welfare check was done by the police, which is really odd. It's about 5 days after she was missing. And what I'm reading in news reports is that he had packed a number of bags, looked like he had put his house up on the market. I mean, he had done everything he could do. It's kind of like Scott Peterson selling his wife's car before there's any resolution to whether or not she's gone. Some things are just very telling. And apparently there was blood spatter evidence in the bedroom where the bags were being laid out and packed. This guy did everything he could do to telegraph that he was involved in this crime. Now, doesn't sound like they found a body, and it sounds like he's been charged with concealment of a body. But this guy, obviously a flight risk. He's probably got a passport from another country. At least he and his wife appear to be immigrants from Nepal or some other country. But make a long story short, if you're the prosecutors, you don't want this guy to get away right now. So they grabbed him on the charge they could hold him on for now. And the investigation, I'm sure, is full throttle.
That kind of leads into my next question because right now he's just charged with concealing the body. But according to
Mhm.
court documents, prosecutors are inferring that he killed her, but he's not charged with murder yet. Why would that be?
That's kind of a strange situation. I legally can't speak to the prosecutor's decisions. I'm not an attorney, but I can say from a detective's perspective, has to be much more evidence that we don't know about that they have found, whether it be DNA, more blood evidence, whether it be in a vehicle or something else. For them to charge him with the murder, there must be a combination of things, whether it be text messages between the two that are threatening, statements he's made to other persons that are threatening, um, obvious intent, previous actions, previous police calls to the residents. There has to be a case that's there circumstantially right now for them to even bring the concealment of a body charge. They're holding him without bond, which is very unusual for a case like this, but they know he's involved. They just need to get their ducks in a row.
So it sounds to me, based on what you're saying, that obviously the investigation is in the early stages. They're going to hold him on the charge that they have and continue the investigation, I would assume, in hopes that they gather enough evidence to then charge him with her murder.
Right. I would say so. A person who's as this doesn't appear to me to be something he thought out all that well in advance. Uh, if he did, he wouldn't have stumbled and bumbled for 5 days or so. There still wouldn't have been blood spatter evidence in the room where allegedly, I would assume, the violence took place in this case. She hasn't turned up. Her body hasn't turned up, which means he was fairly good at concealing, although temporarily. Now, he may be sociopathic and never give it up, and he's lawyered up. He's probably never going to make a statement, but people around him will be able to talk about what the relationship was like, where it was going, if there was previous violence or threats of violence. But for them to hold him on this, they clearly have something more than what the surface is. And I haven't read the full court filing yet, and I'd like to read that. I'll learn more about that when I do. But this is a very interesting case. Be one to watch.
But in order to charge Naresh with murder, there's one major piece of evidence that's missing. So, as far as the body, right now, investigators have not yet found one. They're presuming that she's dead, but there is no body. So, could that be another reason why investigators haven't yet charged him with murder because they don't actually have her body?
I would say so. Once you charge someone with a crime, there's a clock that starts ticking. And a homicide case, you don't want that clock to run out before you have the evidence you need because you get one shot at it. And so they really want to make sure. And you, once you have him in custody, you can take your time and be very thorough about it. The last thing in the world you want is to charge someone with a case and have it fall apart because of time frames or because the evidence simply hasn't come in that time frame. Now, circumstantial murder cases have been successfully prosecuted without the body, and that's based upon a totalitarian look at the circumstances. Everything there leads to this conclusion. Those are tough cases, though, and many prosecutors and prosecuting officers are afraid to go near them, but some do with great success.
Murphy says a lot of what Naresh did leading up to his wife's disappearance is suspicious at the very least, pretty much starting from the jump. Let's wind back the clock a little bit and go back to when she first went missing. So her friends report that they last spoke to her around July 27th, 28th. And eventually her husband then tells police, yeah, I last saw her on July 31st. But as you mentioned prior, there was a wellness check called by her coworkers when she didn't show up to work on August 1st. Then days later, it's August 5th when he finally reports her missing. So that time lapse there is a really big red flag for me. What do you think?
Absolutely. And part of this investigation would be where was he during that time? Did he show up for work? Where does his cell phone information show him traveling to and from? People leave a trail. They leave an electronic, a digital trail now more than ever. So there's a lot of stuff that's I can imagine what's being investigated right now. The phone, his movements, everything that he did in that entire time frame from the 26th, 27th up till August 5th when he did the reporting is going to come to light. He's going to be seen on video cameras going into stores, making purchases, his credit cards, his charges, everything that he did is going to come under a microscope. And that takes a little bit of time, but they will narrow down and they will probably be able to find where he was at what time, and all of it will have to be checked out.
Also, something to check out, the discrepancies in Naresh's reporting to police. First, he claimed Mamta was visiting relatives in Florida or New York, and besides the geographical difference, turns out she doesn't have relatives in either state. But there's more than just this lie. Additionally, he said, hey, she destroyed her phone. I don't know where it is. But investigators were able to grab some data from her phone, so that can't exactly be accurate. So this misinformation, is that also bad for him?
Very bad for him. It puts him into a corner where his theories or arguments against a charge are now very limited because he's proven himself to be telling untruths or bold lies to police investigators. And he's doing what a lot of people under pressure do, which is throw out an answer to try to throw someone off your trail. And typically that comes back to haunt you because these detectives and investigators are going to be very thorough and they have the benefit of time and they don't have the stress on them that he has. So anything he said in those first few days is going to be used against him and will come back to haunt him.
And other pieces of evidence were seemingly destroyed or altered. In this case, he sold their Tesla and then put up their house for sale. Those are also big red flags for me too. Thinking as far as the Tesla, do you think that investigators would track down whoever purchased it, take a look through it?
Absolutely. You're going to want to find that car. You're going to find that car, get a search warrant for it, and go through it with a fine-tooth comb forensically. You're going to want to check any electronics in it or computer data to find out where it's been, where it was, charged, anything you can find out about that vehicle because he didn't do this on foot. And so that car may be a treasure trove of information. And if it's not, it's because he used a different vehicle or he cleaned it. And you can tell if a vehicle has been cleaned extensively recently too. So all of this is important. Every detail needs to be tracked down of his movements and his life.
If we're talking about cleaning, that lights off an alarm bell too, because we do have surveillance video of him in Walmart. He's purchasing cleaning products. And actually, the day before, he purchased 3 knives. And when investigators came and issued the search warrant, they could only find one of the knives. So does that kind of bolster the case for the prosecution, this major evidence there?
Absolutely. This is circumstantial evidence which does not directly point to the crime, but helps create the picture, the overall picture of his actions, his intentions. How often do you buy 3 knives? How often do you go buy cleaning products? The chances are good, very rarely. All these things are not coincidences, and I do not believe in coincidences in cases like this.
Even early on in the investigation, this case parallels 2 other high-profile murder cases. To start, there's the Scott Peterson case, who was convicted of murdering his wife Lacey and their unborn son Connor back in 2004. And as Murphy mentioned, during the early stages of that investigation, Scott Peterson sold off Lacey's car, much like Naresh did in this case. But there are also echoes of another famous defendant, Chris Watts, who was eventually convicted in the murder of his pregnant wife and their 2 daughters. Prior to all that, though, Watts was very outspoken with local media, pleading for help to find his family. And now in this case, the defendant also spoke with local media, and he kind of made a plea saying, hey, we love you so much. If you're out there and missing, we're here waiting for you. That to me also is very interesting. What do you make of him discussing things with the media?
A desperate attempt at public relations, a desperate attempt to salvage a reputation and to build a persona that he's a loving husband who misses his wife. They may get in front of the media and do that, but their actions are what really speak volumes. If a regular, normal, loving husband, his wife went missing, if it happened to me, I would be living at the police detective's desk. I would be going out every day with everyone I could muster. I wouldn't be sleeping. I'd barely be eating. I would look like a person who is absolutely distraught. That's not what we have here. And that's not what we have with Scott Peterson either. That's not what we have with Chris Watts.
Is that something that prosecutors could then use? Let's say down the line, this is going to a jury trial. So they bring back this information, these interviews before his charges, and use it as part of their case?
Yes, it's a public statement that you gave freely and willingly, without any duress, without being questioned by law enforcement. Those are all usable statements. If he takes the stand, they're usable. If he doesn't take the stand, they're background information, but that depends upon the judge. That would be something argued before a judge as to whether or not those statements are admissible. In the court of public opinion, of course, you've put yourself out there. And that's something that you can't take back once you open your mouth.
So far, we've mainly touched on circumstantial evidence, like Naresh lying about his wife visiting relatives or buying knives and cleaning products. But there's a great deal of physical evidence, too. So, if we're going into the house where the alleged crime happened, according to court documents, there was what appeared to be blood throughout the bathroom, the bedroom, and that line really stood out to me. It said it appeared to be blood. Why is this something that prosecutors wouldn't be completely certain of when they're writing up the court docs?
I It depends. Maybe they haven't got lab tests back yet. That seems to be they would have that sooner, but that really depends. Court court documents are, in many ways, they write things up vaguely to leave room in case there's an accident, an issue. They'll say alleged substance. Until it's tested and confirmed 100% by a laboratory, you want to be very careful on how you word those things. However, for them to write that, detectives are not inexperienced with blood. Investigators have not never seen it. You see it all the time in cases. You get to know what it looks like, and you get to know what blood spatter looks like from knife wounds, especially where it's being thrust multiple times and producing cast off blood that comes in almost predictable patterns on walls and ceilings. So, having seen those things before, and I can imagine these detectives have, they're saying with a high degree of confidence this is blood and that's what it is. But the test results have to confirm that.
So you spoke about the blood spatter. That also stood out to me because we have that was discovered, and then also those knives that he purchased, and some of which were not found when the search warrant was executed. That gets me thinking that potentially she could have been stabbed to death. Is that where your mind goes?
I would think so, and it depends upon the scene. A gunshot leaves a different level or a different type. If it's an in and out wound, it'll leave a different type of blood on a wall or something behind a person, a different pattern. Knives, as I say, are usually multiple stab wounds with the knife coming up and out. And when it comes up, it typically has what's called cast off, where some of that fresh blood will, because of the motion, cast off the knife and hit a location, and it leaves a predictable series of blood stains per se. And you can tell direction. And people who are really good at reading crime scenes can tell you, first stab here, second stab here, knife was coming at this angle, all that sort of stuff. That's the forensic examination piece of a crime scene that comes to play and is so valuable. And based upon what they're saying, it sounds as though that's what we're talking about.
It just keeps coming back to one major bit of evidence that's missing: the body. We're really talking a lot about the body because that is a huge question mark in this case. We don't know where it is. Where would
Mhm.
investigators start as they're searching for it?
Well, you look inside the home for any evidence that'll lead you to a place, let's say, whether it be a receipt for a storage facility, another vehicle or another residence or a place that's owned, an office or something. If he has his own business, does he have a back area to it? Where does his cell site information show him as traveling during that time period? Did he go up to the woods someplace? You're going to want to look there. If he has the tracking identifiers in his Tesla, where does that show he went? Because maybe he left his phone at home to try to evade that, but the car documented it. Maybe that's why he sold it right away, along with the evidence, if there's any forensic evidence. You're going to want to find anything you can. If he's got credit cards or debit card statements showing he's at this Walmart in this city at this time, you can look at various routes. A lot of the information is out there electronically, digitally, that will tell you where this person was, and that's your starting point.
Now, we know we haven't yet found a body, but this part is kind of speculation on my part, and I wanted to know what you were thinking. If investigators are going through, and let's say they do find a significant amount of blood, and they can kind of determine if this person lost this much blood, they wouldn't have been able to survive, but we don't have the body. Do you think that could then lead to a murder charge? Because we know whoever this victim was, whoever's blood it is, wouldn't have been able to survive.
That could be a contributing factor in the decision to make a prosecution for a circumstantial murder case. Absolutely. Along with many other things. Remember, you have to convince a jury, being told they need to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. And in a case like this, the worst case scenario for anybody, prosecutor, except for the defendant, is that the missing person who you've presumed dead and charged the husband with the murder walks into the courtroom halfway through the trial and says, I just wanted to take a break from life, or something like that. You have to be very certain that that's what happened. And part of that is being able to say with some certitude that the body no longer can be alive.
So what's next for Naresh and the case against him? In your professional opinion, what do you think is next? Do you think that murder charges are around the corner for him?
I think they're certainly headed in that direction. They're certainly headed in that direction. Finding a body, of course, is what you want to do. If you can't find the body, then you have a tough decision to make as a prosecutor's office. But if this person walks out of jail, I think he's given every indication he's getting on a plane and he's leaving this country. I mean, that can be left to know. I mean, for all we know, he has airline tickets that he's purchased already. We don't know. Um, there's many things that investigators will hold close to the vest for fear of having someone come in and pretend to be a witness for or against something. You want some things only the killer to know. You want to hold them tight. That may be the case here. If they find a body, I think you'll see very soon after that murder charges lodged against him.
You mentioned keeping details close to the vest, and this is something we see throughout a lot of cases. But why is that investigators wouldn't reveal everything right away?
Well, there are times when people come forward and say that they're witnesses to something and they really aren't. For a variety of reasons it happens, and it can muddy the waters and it can take away a lot of valuable investigative time. You want to be careful to only allow certain pieces of information out that you need to be out with the public. The prosecution, once it goes to court, has to put everything forward. But until then, you run the risk of people falsely reporting things, or if you are to get a statement from the persons involved, you want to know that they're telling the truth.
With that in mind, investigators may already have an idea about what led up to Mamta's alleged murder, because as Murphy says, someone knows something.
Nobody just decides one day to buy 3 knives and cleaning equipment and kill their wife. There was a problem or problems in this relationship. Everybody around them knew about it. Whether or not they culturally decided not to say anything or accepted it is another thing, but everyone knew about it. Messaging between the two of them. She was a nurse, a professional woman, University of Virginia Medical Center. There were friends that she worked with who were probably well aware of what was going on in her home. Those will all paint a picture of a very dysfunctional marriage that now went where it went. So I think you want to look at that. You want to look at that text messaging. This is murder is a crime of relationship, and in this case, the closest one to you is often the one responsible for it. But the trail is usually left, and he probably left a very vivid trail of his anger, his distaste, and his intentions towards her. That will tell a true story more than anything else.
Naresh appeared in court again Monday morning, where a judge ruled he's both a danger to the community and also a flight risk, so he's still being held without bond. He's due back in court on October 24th for another hearing. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.